Hello, everybody. Good Thursday evening to you. As always, I'm letting the stream kind of do its thing to make sure that's hitting all the platforms. As if you've been watching anything that I've been doing at Eclectic Arts with these live streams, and oh, there I see myself. So that's looking really good, and so no concerns there. And yeah, if you're been following the Alice tour, the Chapter 3, then you probably know that the band is working on their music video tonight. And clearly, if you're over here either on Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, then you know that you came over to the Eclectic Art side of things to see what I'm up to here at 7 p.m. on the West Coast. And yeah, today's been an interesting day, a very busy day, but definitely more good than bad. So I don't have anything to complain about, and I'm really excited about my guest tonight. I always love talking to people that are in the film industry because it's so foreign to me. I'm just there as a fan watching things and reviewing things, but in terms of how they're made, I love hearing all that kind of the behind the scenes kind of story and how things come to be and all the trials and tribulations. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this because this film came onto my radar. Oh boy, that was probably at least a summer ago, and we might actually get into some of that with my guest. But again, hopefully you're all having a good Thursday night where you are in the world. And tomorrow we go right back to Alice TV on Twitch, and we finish out the tour all the way through the 22nd, which is next Thursday, so a week from today. But tonight it's Eclectic Arts time, and here we go. So my guest tonight is a filmmaker. He wrote and directed the new film, The Paper Tigers. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Bao Tran. And let's bring him in. Hey there. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing good, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So, hey, let's kind of talk about things. I want to obviously talk about the Paper Tigers, but before we get there, I would love to hear your background as a filmmaker, what got you into the industry, and all the other kind of things that entails.
Yeah, well, pretty much born and raised here in the Pacific Northwest. Growing up as a first generation Vietnamese immigrant, I guess. Well, my parents and our family came here from Vietnam in the late 70s, and I was the first of my generation to be born here. So I guess that would be kind of the first roots to set down. And kind of grew up in this, bilingual, bicultural household. Also seeing different types of movies from different cultures, right? So we would see, go and watch E.T. and Terminator in the theaters, but then at home we'd go and rent, these videotapes that we'd get from the local mom and pop Vietnamese shop that would be the dubbed versions of Hong Kong movies or Hong Kong series or TVB series. So it's kind of an interesting diet, to kind of get both East and West and different types of forms of entertainment and have that be a part of our growing up. So that was very much part of that. And I didn't really want to make movies until I started seeing Jackie Chan and more figuring out, kind of being inspired by what he can do and what he did filmically, because there was just such a style and technique that he had with his filmmaking that was just so enchanting to me. And that's when I decided, to try it out, grab the family camcorder and go out, grab your friends and try punching them in the face and videotaping it at the same time, and stuff like that. So yeah, and just kind of harkening back, growing up watching Hong Kong movies, obviously Kung Fu Theater, that was like always a big thing on Saturdays. And then Bruce Lee was a huge influence. But again, Jackie Chan was one who kind of like set me on the course as far as like wanting to actually make movies as opposed to just being entertained by it. And then if you know Jackie Chan, he has a lot of influences in film. He's talked about Buster Keaton and Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire and all these people as his movie influences. So that kind of opened up the doors for me, just trying to figure out, what he was inspired by and try to look at all these other things. So that was kind of a crash course in movies to really explore silent movies and musicals. And then from that on, just kind of really loving and falling in love with movies as a whole from all types of artists throughout the world.
Okay, I'm just curious. What was the first Jackie Chan film that you saw that you remember?
I would say Police Story. That was probably the one that really stayed in. I think I saw some of the earlier kind of 70s stuff for sure. But I think Police Story had this modern thing that just felt like it was just so different. Like, oh, there's like people driving cars in Hong Kong and fighting. as opposed to kind of like these old school, like really classical Ming Dynasty, a revenge plot. So it was just kind of a really refreshing thing. And it's funny kind of talking about, when we talk about representation, and I'm sure we can talk about it a little bit more, but a lot of people felt like when they grew up, they didn't feel like they had people that looked like them on screen. But for me, that, just by the uniqueness of my upbringing, I saw people that looked like me on screen. They were just speaking in a different language or in a different country. But I always felt like these were just as much important in entertainment culture or pop culture, just as much as anyone that I was seeing, on regular TV. We always said the regular TV and then what you had on tape. That was always kind of a little distinction to make. But all those movie stars were all huge stars, regardless of where they came from.
That's true, and that's a great point. That you got to see someone that did look like you. Coming up. For myself, I was born and raised here, but I didn't get into Asian cinema until like late '80s, early '90s. So like I remember the first Jackie Chan film. Well, it's not the first one because I saw the Big Brawl or whatever that was here when it was in not Big Brawl, whatever that movie that he had in America before.
Protector? Cannonball Run?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Protector.
Yeah.
That the first film that I saw of his that was like distinctly from Hong Kong was Drunken Master 2. And like I just that's when I totally got it. I was like, oh my gosh! I had to start digging back and looking at Dragons Forever and and Police Story 1, 2, 3, Super Cop, and all that kind of thing. And I saw Chinese Ghost Story. That was one of my favorite films, and all that kind of thing. And but I didn't see it till later. So for me, it was very much seeing Western films, Western TV. My parents were born here, so I was very Americanized. So I didn't see people that look like me necessarily on television. I saw the the portrayals of David Carradine doing kung fu, trying to be Asian, but not quite hitting the mark. But so that's interesting with that Jackie Chan was kind of that catalyst that got you interested in trying to make films and studying, like you said, silent film, and Buster Keaton was a huge influence on him. And so did you end up going to film school, just studying things on your own? How did you kind of get into the early stages of actually, your film career?
No, I didn't go to film school, and that was kind of like watching films and studying it. Fortunately, we had it was at a period where you had stuff on VHS, so you could kind of pause and rewind and watch it. It's a different experience if I had to go see it in a theater. I couldn't actually break it down to the nuts and bolts of it all. So that was basically just being voracious and studying and watching and figuring out what exactly was at work here. So it was a lot of reverse engineering and a lot of trial and error, a lot of mentors along the way, and just trying to figure out how to do this, but never a real like formal film school in that sense. So yeah, it was just kind of like a lot of by trial by fire and just kind of doing it and then figuring out how to improve and do better the next time.
Okay, that's interesting. So what was the first, I guess you could say, project that you considered this is something that I feel I can actually put out to the world?
Well, I always felt that way. I mean, anything that I want to do, I just wanted to this was something that wasn't just to show to your friends or entertain people who already know and love you, which is a distinct few. I can count on my hand that many people. But you want to make something that something strangers that could like, because I think that's what I really loved as far as when you really kind of get into the movie experience and the theatrical experience. Some of it's really spiritual to me, because I still remember watching T2 in a theater and just being blown away by that, and then just having a whole crowd of people that you don't know, that you don't spend just 2 hours with, but that's like really thrilling, that you're all laughing and crying and cheering at the same time. That's a really powerful thing, and it's something that really kind of speaks to all us as human beings. I think we all kind of search for these stories and look for these moments. So I think that's the stuff that I was always looking for. I wasn't too into kind of like more the artsy kind of type of filmmaking, which is, I think, has its place, and it's certainly, it's very commendable in its own sense. But for me, as far as my personal kind of influence and taste, I always wanted to make a movie that was something that could appeal to everyone, and I think that's what the appeal, of Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin or any of the great musicals you're making a movie that, everyone around the world who doesn't matter language. And maybe that's kind of like goes back to when, watching just Hong Kong movies, it didn't matter what languages, and you just kind of like were drawn into the visuals and the action and the story. So that's the stuff that I was really taken to. And that's the stuff I still want to kind of like do with my own work.
Okay, no, excellent. That, yeah, it sounds like all of the things that you love about cinema, that's what you wanted to also put out there through your own work. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like just as being a musician that at some point, I wanted to join a band. I didn't want to just keep playing in my bedroom. I want to get out there, for better or worse. I
Yeah.
want people to hear this kind of thing and see if it resonates with anyone. That's kind
Yeah.
of part of the fun.
Yeah.
And so with the Paper Tigers, is this your first feature film, or were there some shorts before it that you also filmed, or what's that the filmography look like?
Yeah, so The Paper Tigers is my first feature film that I directed. So I wrote the script as well, and I had made some short films that I wrote and directed as well previous to this. But as I mentioned, I'm Vietnamese, and there's a kind of a trend of a lot of Asian Americans, or kind of like first generations, that are going back to their homelands or their countries of ethnicity, of ethnic origin, and then finding some opportunity there, whether it's because there's a glass ceiling here in the U.S., or whether it's just different just kind of opportunities. And I kind of followed a lot of my friends, a lot of Vietnamese American filmmaking peers, who started setting down in Vietnam in particular, and building up the industry there. And right now it's really vibrant and it's very exciting. It's hugely upcoming. Um, the movies are all in Vietnamese, and it's for the Vietnamese audience. So it's just kind of like nice to see a whole self-functioning homegrown cinema that's doing some really incredible work, and just being part of that. So I worked as an editor out there for a couple filmmakers, including Justin Nguyen. If we're talking about Asian American icons, Justin Nguyen, for example, had spent some time here, obviously spent time here in Hollywood
Mhm.
on projects, but he also went to Vietnam to find some other opportunities as well. And Bruce Lee, right? That's another kind of classic example. Like, he was hitting a wall or a glass ceiling here in the U.S. and decided to go to Hong Kong and make his features there. So it's a kind of an example. It's just, we're in a long tradition of many of us artists, finding some opportunities, especially if we're kind of bicultural, kind of living between different cultures, and able to kind of travel between two cultures and countries. We're just going to find opportunities like that. So, yeah, so I edited feature films out there, but this would be the first time for me to direct.
Okay, so that's fascinating. I had no idea, what the film scene was like over in Vietnam. So that's really fascinating to me to hear that kind of thing. I'm a behind the scenes kind of person. I love that kind of stuff. So like
Yeah,
when even like when Laserdisc came out, and you have another audio track to listen to from the
I love
director
it.
while you're watching. I totally ate that stuff up. So I cherish these opportunities when I get to talk to filmmakers about their process and how everything came to be. And so if having written and directed the Paper Tigers, for people like me that don't really understand, how does a film get made? What do you do? What do you start with?
Start with the idea, and just to kind of give a quick spiel of the movie. It's about these three kung fu classmates who grew up training together, eating, breathing, sleeping kung fu under the guidance of their master here in the U.S. And then things happen, and life gets in the way. They grow up and they grow old and grow apart from each other, and they get estranged from their master. And then they find out in middle age, now in modern day, that their master is killed, and they have to find out what happened and avenge their master. But now they have kids, they have jobs, they have wives. So it's kind of like, the way we kind of pitch it is like, imagine if you had to fight a challenge match tonight, but then you got to go pick up your kid from soccer. So it's a little bit of that kind of culture clash that, kind of, I guess, permeates, a lot of, the things, the way I see the world. And then just also kind of like exploring those themes of kung fu, ancient kung fu, arcane values in the modern day world. Do those things still have value anymore? Do those things hold weight for us, especially as we get more and more distracted for whatever reasons in our lives? But to me, I think it starts with the idea of the story, and just trying to figure out what comes from there, because that is going to dictate if you're going to spend this much time, for me, I spent 9 years and counting so far. If you're going to spend this much time on a project, you really want to believe in it and see that the story is worth doing and worth telling, and be able to do that to get you through kind of like the tougher times.
Wow, 9 years and counting. I I did an interview with a filmmaker from Germany, and they'd been working on theirs for 6 years. And I thought that was a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's
Um,
par for the course. Yeah, I think we all kind of the passion projects, take a lot of time, and it just takes a lot of time to develop and get the momentum that it needs.
yeah, no, and at least from the other film folks I've had the privilege of interviewing, it seems to be that the biggest hurdle they've always encountered has been funding, finances.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
absolutely. I think the financing is. I think by nature we are artists who learn how to be business people, because there is kind of a whole machine and kind of a business aspect of making a movie as well. From funding and financing and production, distribution and marketing and all those things. Those are all kind of like things you don't really think about when you're in your backyard making home videos. Like you just kind of want to make movies, right, and tell stories. But then there's all the other pieces of it, and it's a very different thing. And that was kind of the interesting thing for me to kind of spend time in Vietnam to see these movies that were made and financed immediately and then go to theaters, right? You would be working on a movie and you had a release date. So kind of similar if you work in the studio system here in the US, you're working on a movie, it has a release date, you have a target, that you have to hit and all that stuff. But for an independent film, there's a lot of starts and stops and a lot of like kind of like hits and near misses and all that, etc. And like maybe you get your movie sold, and fortunately, we were able to and have distribution, and this doesn't happen to every movie. So there's a lot of it's fraught with a lot of potential failures and potential pitfalls around all that. So it's a very different beast, independent filmmaking, um, uh, but it's rewarding because you do have your own creative control and you're able to kind of like tell the story that you want to, the way you intend.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, and it just makes me admire folks like yourself that much more. That you're so passionate about something, and like you just said, that there's these hits, misses, ups and downs over such a long period of time. That yeah, you really, really have to believe in your project to see it through. And again, some of the other independent filmmakers that I've had a chance to talk to, they said exactly the same thing. That there's so many times they either wanted to give up or they thought, oh, we finally got all these pieces in place, and then something happens and they disappear. They lose a location, they lose an investor.
Yeah.
There's something happens to one of their actors, so they have to kind of pause things. And something else, at least that I've learned, is that it seems that what you start with films is not necessarily what you end up with at the end.
Yeah.
There's lots of things in between that happen and can kind of change the course of what your final product is. Um,
Well, hopefully you end up with more, right? I mean, the idea is like eventually you can, if you have something that it's, that cliche, the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. I think that's something that it's true. And there's real power in that, because if you really if you're passionate about something, hopefully it's evident to others, so that for film, it's very collaborative and you're trying to ask other people to work with you. It's not just, writing a novel on your own, right? It's
mhm.
like you're asking other people to put their blood, sweat, and tears and time into this project. So the idea is like if you're passionate, hopefully that rubs off and inspires other people to want to pour in. And when they pour in, it just becomes exponential because it becomes bigger than what you want. So like I love working with actors and I love working with all my department heads because they can bring something new and different that I can never think of with their expertise and their perspective. So that's always like that's when you can kind of have that creative fusion, and just like that can't be beat because that's everyone's hitting it on all cylinders and whatnot. So I think that's a hugely important thing as well. And then and like you mentioned, kind of the tenacity of it, kind of the grit of it. And I really love kind of like we're in Seahawk country, so we can kind of call out our Seahawks. But Pete Carroll's Coach Pete Carroll's kind of philosophy about grit and competition
Mhm.
was really cool to me. Like I read it, a couple of years ago. The was it The Art of Winning or something? Always compete, win
Yeah.
forever. Always compete, win forever. Um, but just really powerful. You just have to kind of keep at it and kind of have an ethos and a habit of that, because in a lot of ways, like I have a lot of friends I think who are incredibly talented and probably more talented than me, and yet in a lot here we are. I'm able to kind of make this feature film, and I think it's just because of kind of tenacity and grit versus talent than anything. So it's kind of interesting, kind of looking back and thinking about the progress that we made. I mean, it's just sheer willpower at a certain point.
I can identify that with that. There's many times, having been born and raised here in Seattle, that a lot of the artistic folks that I'm friends with, I do kind of, maybe in my quiet moments, kind of think about how did I get what I've gotten when I see somebody else who I think is 10 times more talented than me,
Yeah,
and they're still kind of either struggling or just not kind of getting where they want to go. And I'm just really grateful for the fact that somewhere along the line, there's something in my belly that just fires up and it won't
yeah,
stop,
exactly.
and it just kind of propels you into hopefully good things of
Yeah.
what you want to have happen. Um, so since it was like a 9-year process and counting, did you start like principal photography way back when, or was it kind of we're getting all these things together and eventually now we can start shooting like a year or 2 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I guess it should be said there was nothing traditional about the way we made this movie. Again, it was all by hook or by crook and just elbow grease, and we just kind of like took whatever it took to get to where we at. So we had a lot of fits and starts. So we did have some funding, but not all of the funding.
Hmm.
And the way the script kind of worked out, it was in a way we could shoot a portion of the film with the cast of characters that were in our the period, the younger period, if you will. So we were able to kind of shoot that portion beforehand. We had some money and we shot that a couple of years ago, and then we had that and we cut a trailer out of that, and then we used that to kind of pitch for our Kickstarter to raise money to shoot the rest of the film. So it was just like all very piecemeal and not traditional by any means. But it was just kind of whatever it took that for us to kind of get it done. So we shot the main portion of the film last summer in Seattle in 2019, and that was a good 30 days of filming that we were able to kind of like get everything together. Because what happens is like once it's basically putting a train together and having it move. So when it's like you can't really do much until you have all the pieces in place, and then when you have it's like go time. So it's a really kind of trippy thing because you're sitting here waiting all this time to work on something, and suddenly when there's a green light, everybody's schedule needs to line up and everything, and it's just like you gotta like bust it out. So we that's a very fast shoot for 30 days for us to be able to kind of do all the things that we needed to do, and we did it. So and ever since then we were in posts from fall into spring, and then we hit lockdown and we were doing our post production remotely and all that. So here we are.
Wow. So in I guess some ways, you you got the main things done before the pandemic happened. You could
Yeah.
work things in post, that you're saying virtually, and swapping things back and forth with whoever, instead of like, oh, we need to do reshoots.
Yeah. We are very fortunate. So obviously, I mean, no one could have anticipated, this pandemic coming at all. But we were very fortunate to have shot at the time that we did, and also kind of go in post production and finish the editing at the time that we did. I mean, everything kind of like timing wise, kind of like it just felt like it was this big, giant ball that was rolling down and chasing us, but we were like always one step ahead and trying to figure out how to get out of the way. And then, we managed to, world premiere at a virtual film festival when the film festivals were just starting to turn to virtual platforms. So it was just kind of worked out timing wise for us. It didn't happen, in the time that we wanted it to, but it happened right on time in a weird way. So it was kind of a trip to kind of go through all that.
Wow. Yeah. No. Yeah. It sounds like you had some good time in your own personal Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Exactly. We're gonna get flattened in a bit, but we're still running. We're still running.
Oh man. So, and I know as we were setting up and scheduling this interview, you had showed me some of the many film festivals that you're a part of that are going to be around the world, and let alone, like you mentioned, that Will Go USA bought the rights and is going to be putting it out next year. What's that process like of getting into any film festival, let alone all the ones that you've already been accepted to?
Yeah, I mean, film festivals, for one, are, I think, a cultural treasure because I think, number one, they have certain mandates and certain goals and mission statements to give voices and platforms to filmmakers that usually aren't, seen or profiled, and they love to support first time filmmakers and whatnot. So the film festivals have been, devastated this year. I mean, everyone, as far as like, the whole industry, but I think film festival has been really hit hard, especially because of not being able to have a physical event. And, a lot of that is a cultural event because you're there and you're going to be able to meet the filmmakers and to have these talkbacks and engage with the films and meet other filmmakers as well. So I just want to kind of lay out like what it takes for all these film festivals to really turn to a virtual platform. And it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of courage to be able to do so, because you're changing kind of how you engage with your audience in a different way now. So it's been hugely important, and if ever, even before, it was important for a feature film to kind of have a good platform or a good showcase to be able to show their film. Even now, it's even more important. So their work is so much more valuable at this time, especially. What does it take to kind of get into film festivals? I think relationships, because for me at least, I've made shorts and I've made films previously, and I was able to kind of submit to a lot of film festivals and build relationships there, because they were like, "Oh, we have your film. What are you going to work on next? Keep us posted," and have this conversation. So I was always kind of in communication with the film festivals that have been supportive of my short films. So even from way back when. So I didn't just kind of pop out of nowhere and then just submit in a way that was like, kind of more cold submit, but at least people were anticipating and expecting, work that next worked from me. So very fortunate in just being able to have those relationships with the film festivals, and to be able to showcase. So it just kind of happens, and then word of mouth. One programmer at a film festival might introduce you to another one because they don't know you, or they want to show your film to them. So it's just a lot of that can happen. So the word of mouth and the referral thing is hugely important as well. And some of them are cold submits, and some of them we did just kind of submit without really having a relationship or a previous film screen with them, and that's been worthwhile as well. So there's a lot of different ways that anyone can submit and find their way to the film festival. But most important is like finding the best home for your film. For shorts, it's a little different conversation, but I think for features, when you make your world premiere or make your U.S. premiere, there's a bit of a kind of a strategy that you kind of have to think about in terms of if you're trying to go for distribution, for example, and that's a goal that you have, then that's also a bit of kind of decision making around finding the right festivals for the right reasons.
Okay. Yeah, no, I could understand that and definitely see that of trying to be strategic with what you want to do. So then which places do you try to get involved with, and where do you want to be seen? And it's kind of the same thing with music about if I'm a certain type of band, then I probably want to have certain, if it's producers, managers, what have you, who that manage other similar types of music, see my
Yeah.
band, versus if I'm like doing say classical or jazz, well then I need to kind of have these people kind of see my music, that because they'll understand it, they'll kind of get it. But having said that, there's also those times where you got that person from out of the blue, that friend of a friend of a friend, happen to see the trailer for the Paper Tigers, and it's like, what is this or who is this? And they want to find out. So they can work both ways for sure.
Absolutely.
Want to say hi to Captain Blackwood and Tony that are in the chat right now. I know them from the Alice tour, so they're just
Shout out.
they're chilling and listening to what we're talking about right here. And I want to also, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about diversity, especially during this time of what's been going on in society, but also with this film, with Asian Americans and African Americans, and females. Was it playing any part in your mind when you were making this film about trying to be as diverse as possible, or was it just kind of something that kind of happened, as you went along?
Yeah, I think it was primarily thinking about the story first, and then just kind of the way I see the world and kind of the characters I wanted to portray and have that, and then just work from there. So, if I was, wanting to tell the story that had reflected, the experience that I had, doing martial arts and the people that I grew up with and studied with, and it was diverse and it was multicultural, because that was my experience. So to do anything different would have been a disservice, and it would have been something totally separate from my experience. So I think that was just kind of start from there. It just kind of starts from what felt like true and honest to what I was, what I had and how I saw the world, and then just go from there. And then again, going back and being ready to defend it, because these are not just kind of like arbitrary choices. These are, clear points of experience that you have, and you want to be able to show that story and show that, and be able to tell, for a reason. So, um, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where we're in a funny position where, storytellers of color or Asian Americans or what have you, we're enforced in a position to like kind of defend it, where kind of there's a default whiteness that doesn't have to be defended. And there's oftentimes when you have, regular kind of like white characters, and that doesn't ever gets questioned. But when you have something that looks diverse to that, and then it looks like, well, why are you making that choice? Suddenly, like you're doing it because you're going off the status quo, so something must be wrong, or there's got to be a reason. And kind of the constant burden of um, defending or rationalizing our choices, it often feels like it's a little bit like, well, it's like, why are we? That's kind of the way I see it, and it's kind of a necessary conversation to have sometimes, but in a lot of ways, just creatively and internally, when I'm in my own space, why I'm writing or why I'm creating, you know, that doesn't have any bearing into what I'm doing. I'm just trying to reflect what I see in the story that I want to tell.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's well said. I know, even for myself, not being a filmmaker, but just being a person of color, that depending on what I'm tied to, then I get questions that maybe other people wouldn't get. And it's like, I'm not even thinking about that sometimes, I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
And I can think of even times when I covered this band that was from Japan and they started talking to me in Japanese, and I don't speak the language, but
Yeah.
so they're kind of looking at me funny, like, how is I mean, they know that I'm Japanese American, I was born here, raised, all this kind of thing, but it didn't compute. Like
Mm-hmm.
they hadn't met
Mm-hmm.
someone like me or something
Mm-hmm.
before. It's like you're like us, but you're not. And it's like, well, I'm here to interview you. That's why I'm here. Does it matter that I happen to be Japanese like you, or that I could be black or white, or male, female, whatever?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just really interesting. I wanted to ask you a little bit of a side tangent. I'm trying to get these guys on as well. As how did you get involved with, or maybe how they get involved with you? The martial arts club, I want to say, they do like shorts and stuff. I saw on YouTube.
Marshall Club.
Yeah, they're really
Yeah.
talented guys. How did they get involved with the project?
Yes. So amazingly talented. I guess you would call them a filmmaking crew or a filmmaking team, that also, stars. They write, direct, edit, and they choreograph all this thing. Incredibly talented. Um, but there's a lot of filmmakers that are putting their work online, and that's how I got tipped to them, because they had been putting out like all these martial arts shorts and martial arts pieces. They are really inspired by kind of the old school kind of Shaw Brothers, Lau Kar Long type of generation or style of filmmaking. So that was very unique, because everyone else was kind of doing more modern
Yeah.
John Wick and kind of like Jason Bourne type of stuff. So they were, already like had a very interesting, take on what they were doing, and they're unapologetic and very proud and very, very, uh, you know, again, proud of what they were making and what they were inspired by. So they definitely wore it on their sleeve, Martial Club, and just like talking about martial arts values as well. So they're very compelling in that sense. So when when I and my team were just kind of like starting to figure out financing and kind of raising funding, we had talked about doing this short just as a demonstration of like, well, people are going to ask, well, can you direct martial arts stuff? Can you do fight stuff? Because maybe it's not as explicit in my other stuff that I've done. But so we decided to do a short fight film called The Challenger, and we had to reach out to Andy. Andy's one of the Martial Club to be in it with our action director Ken Kirigwa, and it's online. You can check it out. But we had made that to kind of like use as a kind of an example or a kind of a really just kind of standalone piece of just kind of the action type of storytelling that we wanted to make. So that's how I first, really started working with Andy. Just he's an amazing talent, and if you ever see his channel, you should check it out. It's pretty amazing. Um, and then I just kept him in mind in terms of once it came time to do the rest of the feature, the full on feature. They were people that I always wanted to bring on because I loved working with them. They're incredibly talented, and they just felt really right for the parts that we had them for the movie. And they've gone on to do bigger and better things now. I think they're working on Shang-Chi. and working on, starting from, them just putting out their own videos and putting on YouTube, and getting an audience out of that.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I don't even know how I came across them, but it was one of their short films that maybe somebody had shared or something on social media. And then I started looking through their channel. I was like, yeah, just like you said, they have such a love and respect for the old guard martial arts films. And I just absolutely love that. So I'm like, oh, what else have
Yeah,
they done? And when I saw they were involved with the Paper Tigers, like, oh, this is awesome that there's a marriage of those talents
yeah.
um, going forward. And speaking of kind of going forward, so what are the next premieres for the Paper Tigers? I mean, what film festivals, what countries is it going to be at here in the fall and into the winter into next year?
Yeah, so we have a pretty packed schedule that's coming up. A lot of the U.S. film festivals are going to be virtual, uh, for given the circumstances. So we will be screening at all these film festivals, that are going to be what we call geofenced to certain states and regions, because they want to respect each other's territories. We have San Diego Asian Film Festival coming up, for example, where normally it would be San Diego, but they're going to be opening up, their availability of the VOD stream, to the rest of the country, minus some of the East Coast or New England. Because then after that, we're going to have the Boston Asian American Film Festival that'll have the New England premiere, and then we'll have Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival that will be their opening night. So we'll be their Pennsylvania premiere, and also I think, is it Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Delaware premiere. So everyone's kind of like having jockeying for kind of some of these bragging rights, and we want to work with all the fests to be able to get the audiences that they've had, to come see our film. So people will have to kind of figure out what makes the most sense out of them, and then afterwards we'll be at Hawaii International Film Festival, which is going to stream to all of the U.S. After that. And then internationally, we're going to be at the have our Asia premiere at Busan International Film Festival, and that's going to be at the end of October. And so far, its plan is going to be a physical screening. So South Korea is still pretty functional, and their movie theaters are open and people are going. I think it's going to be limited capacity, but that's a win for us. That we would love to. The original intent and what we always wanted to do is show this movie in a theater with an audience. So it doesn't matter how small they are, it doesn't matter how spread out they are. We will have an opportunity to screen our film at Busan, which will be exciting.
Awesome. Is there a chance you're going to be able to make the trip over there to see this screening in Korea?
Yeah, unfortunately not. As much as they allowed the movie theaters to be open, they're not allowing to invite any foreign filmmaker guests. So at this time, it would have been. We looked into it and we were ready. You have to do a whole 14-day quarantine and figure out how to get there and whatnot. But unfortunately, the fest just wasn't able to officially invite, the filmmakers to present their film. So we'll be doing a Zoom Q&A. I think it'll be put online afterwards, but we'll be doing the best that we can and making the most out of it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense for sure. I didn't even think about the 14-day quarantine and all that.
Yeah.
And can you talk about how the film got picked up by Well Go USA? What was that process like?
Yeah, so we did our world premiere at the Fantasia International Film Festival, which was virtually available to all of Canada. Normally, it is out of Montreal. It's known as one of probably the biggest North American genre film festival. And it was actually quite fortunate in terms of like talking timing, at least for us. They're normally in early June, and we hadn't had finished our film by then. But when they decided to go virtual, they decided pretty early on. I think early spring they made the decision that they were going to pivot to virtual, and then they had new dates, which was the basically the end of August, as their virtual dates. So it actually kind of lined up like we were actually going to be able to finish our film in that time, and then they fortunately invited us to the program and to the festival, and that became our world premiere. Kind of the whole kind of shop talk of what a world premiere might look like is that we would have sales agents. So our sales agents, XYZ Films, who probably most familiar with maybe Raid Redemption, Mandy, and just kind of all these kind of like really cool genre films that kind of is their wheelhouse, if you will. So they really understand how to sell the movie and how to present the movie to buyers. So there's a whole process when you put out the movie and it's available. If it's an independent movie, is to kind of like shop it and sell it to distributors and buyers and whatnot. So we did do through that whole process, but virtually, right? So this was all like online, and there was kind of like different offers and back and forth and negotiations, and ultimately Wellgo felt like the best decision for us, and we were really happy because it was just the right type of distributor. I think it was also in the same sense that we were talking about film festivals,
Mhm.
is that like the biggest is not always the best, because you could go to a film festival and be a small fish in a big pond, and you're not going to have a lot of attention. So you want to go with a film festival that's going to give you some love, and really support you. So the same goes with distributor. Just because you don't go with Warner Brothers or Sony or whatever, they're all great, but sometimes they're a little bit too big, or they may not know what to do with you. Especially for us, we're a bit of a genre. How would you call it? I guess I wouldn't call it a hybrid, but as like we're genre. I like what it said, a genre fluid. Someone else had coined that term, and I really like that term because it's action, it's comedy, it's drama, it's also families, themes, and we're not strictly in a box of what an action movie is, and that's kind of the way we kind of always saw the film, and we wanted to have a distributor that gets that. So Wellgo for us felt like a great partner, especially their experience with Asian films, obviously, but also it's kind of a mom and pop shop out of Texas. If you really look into their story, it's really fascinating to kind of follow their coming up story, if you will. But yeah, they just were really over the moon to have Wellgo as our distributor, especially with a theatrical commitment for 2021. So if you miss it at the film festivals, you'll be able to catch it next year on the wide release.
Awesome. Yeah, congratulations on that. When you told me that before we were setting up this interview, or actually when we were setting up this interview, I was like, how small of a world is this? That I just started reviewing things for them like back in maybe May or so. And
Yeah.
here I am talking to you about this film that I'm really excited to see, and it's like, oh, look who just picked them up.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
if anything, honestly, like attracts like. That's kind of the story of making this film, and going through Kickstarter and finding the right people that wanted to work with us and being the right supporters. So I don't think there's any coincidences in this universe. So we're all here talking right now for a reason. So that's cool.
Awesome. And so obviously you've got this and the promotional side of this going on well into next year for the film. But is there something over here on the side that you're starting to work on for the next project, next feature?
Yeah, absolutely. I always have some other projects that are ready to go and trying to figure out what the next step would be. Because right now we're kind of in this funny gray area with COVID, and nobody really knows what to do. Production is starting to kind of start up again, but it's time consuming and it does cost more money. Like automatically, there's kind of like shifting economics of how to kind of make your next feature. So that's what we're trying to figure out and assess and try kind of what makes sense. But I think still it'll take some time to develop and put together and try to figure out, where to even do it right now. So as well.
Okay, but you do, it sounds like you do have like there's something written or there's something whatever just ready, like kind of waiting for that green light basically to kind of start moving forward with things.
Yeah, I got a drawer full of stuff. Just when it gets ready, what do we want to do? We just figure it out.
Okay, and in the meantime, are you still doing work with the companies in Vietnam as well, or is that
Yeah, I mean that's another possibility too. I mean, like I said, mentioning kind of the where of it all. Like we might, look at some projects that we want to do in Vietnam, for different, kind of different materials that we might have. So, that could all, kind of depends on what shakes out for us because the rest of the world is back to work or has gone back to production. The U.S. is a little bit slower. Canada has started, ahead. So we're all on this weird different levels right now, and in terms of progress, in terms of how we are in terms of getting back to production. So that's kind of the assessment that we'll have to make in terms of like maybe you have this bird in hand where production's going and you have this material and the right project go for that versus this other project that, you know, is bigger, but it's just going to take forever to make, right? So that's kind of like what we'll have to kind of like weigh and figure out what makes the most sense.
Okay. All right. And to kind of wrap this up, and you've already touched on it a bit, but for anyone else that's out there that's watching this now or watching this later, what kind of advice would you give to a budding young filmmaker?
Stop now. Go to pottery, figure out something. How to make PPE. That's what you do. That's the industry you want to make. How to make masks. Uh, Tough times. Yeah, I'll be really honest. You know, it is tough times in trying to figure out what kind of next steps are in this pandemic. But on a broader term, if you want to do it, just do it, because there's nothing that I can say or anyone else that could say that could discourage you if you really have the passion and desire to make something happen. That's the fire within, and that I can't really give that to anyone. Um, I think if anything, you know, just kind of like just do the work that you need to do safely and do it, you know, in the right manner, but also just kind of like own that title that you're a filmmaker. If you're doing it, you're doing it. You know, you're not aspiring anymore. You're not sitting there thinking about it. Just do it, and you are a filmmaker. So yeah.
Nice. Sound advice is basically what a lot of the other guests have said, not just with filmmaking, but just any kind of artistic endeavor, is get out there and do it. Don't you don't think it to death. Don't do it. Just like be seen and start believing in your project. And yeah, you're going to have ups and downs, and things could go sideways on you. But at least you're in that process. You're making it happen instead of like just thinking and wishing it happens.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. This was awesome talking to you about the Paper Tigers. And for anyone out there that wants to at least check out the trailer, you can go. I know it's on YouTube, and you have the papertigersmovie.com is the website. Is there anything else you'd like to add plug wise?
No, the papertigersmovie.com is the best way to kind of get us. You can find all our festival screening schedule, and once we have a release date figured out, you know, you can find it all there. And then find our social media handles and follow us, you know, on the platform that you like. Because I think the social media is gonna, well, those will get like kind of the latest updates and obviously the more up to date stuff. So yeah, you'll have all the choice of how you want to join us. We have a mailing list, etc.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Stay safe. I can't wait to see the actual full-length feature next year through Elgo USA, and hopefully I get the chance to actually see it in the theater. If I can, that'd be even better.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, and yeah, just take care, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to you sooner than later.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully it'll also happen. Everyone wear a mask, stay safe, and vote, and make sure we all kind of look out for each other, because we all we need.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right, thanks, brother.